in charge ahead of my life. It's a privilege once again to be here amongst all your honorable people. We're going to read a voice of this scripture, 2 Timothy. He said, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, according to the promise of life which is in Christ. And he said, to Timothy, my dear beloved son, grace, mercy, and peace from God, the Father, Christ our Lord. And we can drop down here. We can say verse 7 said, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. This morning, bow your heads with me. I ain't got no nugget for you this morning. Let us pray. Oh, gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you, God, for this day, God. God, we thank you, God, for this last Wednesday in this month. God, you're being good to us. Oh, how sweet the name of Jesus sound in every believer's ear. That soothe our sorrow, God, and you drive away all our fear. God, we just want to say thank you because you're being good to us. God, we just want to say thank you, God, because we're still in the land of the living. God, we ask you right now, God, as we do the business of the people in this house, God, we ask you, God, we'll do everything in decency and order. Father God, in the name of Jesus, touch every members of this house, God, in the mighty name of Jesus. Anybody sick among us, God, touch them right now, God, from the crown of their head to the sole of their feet. God, we decree miracles upon this country, God. We decree blessings right now. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. And thou hast taught us to say, children, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from all evil. For thine is your kingdom, your power, and your glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the peace of God be with you, that passes all understanding.
Make sure you're reading the right one. Last one. No. Yeah, go ahead.
Philip Davis, Chester Cooper, Fred Mitchell, Glennis Hannah Martin, Obadiah Wilchcomb, Alfred Sayers, Dr. Michael Darble, Clay Sweeting, Keith Bell, Wayne Monroe, Vaughn Miller, Joebeth Colby Davis, Ginger Moxie, Mario Bolag, Jomo Campbell, Basil McIntosh, Miles Larota, Pia Glover Roll, Lisa Ramming, Zane Lightborn, Dr. Hubert Minnis, Jamal Strawn, John Pinder, Marcus Roll, Leon Lundy, Kirk Cornish, Wade Watson, Leonardo Lightborn, Leslie Miller Bryce, Leroy Major, Sylvanius Petty, Raquel Bonnaby, Michael Pintard, James Kwesi Thompson, Aram Lewis, Shannon Don Cartwright, Adrian Gibson, Adrian White.
Good morning, my fellow colleagues of this honorable house. Firstly, I wish to take this opportunity to wish Madam Speaker a speedy recovery. She's not feeling well, and I think that we should all give her a call and keep her in our prayers, because she's also lost a brother. On behalf of the wonderful people of Northern Lutra Constituency, Harbour Island in particular, I wish to extend heartfelt condolences to the families of the late Miss Quincy Stubbs, Mr. Andreas Thompson, and Miss Elizabeth Jinxie Roberts, who passed away during the past week. Bralin has lost some great people, and I pray that God will comfort and sustain the families and community during this difficult time. May their souls rest in peace. Introduction and swearing of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Statement and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Fox Hill.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker. I want to start off before the formal communication by extending, because I neglected a family duty yesterday as a result of this work that we do. Yesterday had been my sister's birthday, and I was supposed to go by her home last evening where she was having some friends. I completely forgot about it. That's one of these things about this job, that you get carried away and you neglect these family responsibilities. So I figured the way I make it up is say happy birthday call this morning. I'm sorry I missed the occasion. Today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, marks the 57th anniversary in what is known in our history books as Black Tuesday. It was on this day that the late Celinda O'Pinling, the father and founding prime minister of our country, threw the speaker's mace out of the window of the House of Assembly, and he was followed by Sir Milo Butler, who threw the speaker's hourglass out of the window. And for those of you who don't know, the hourglass used to time the speeches of members of Parliament. It was limited to 15 minutes. You could only speak for 15 minutes, and then you had to get permission to speak again. And Milo Butler took umbrage at this because it limited, in his view, the time to speak. So when the Progressive Liberal Party became the government in '67, all the time limits were removed from speeches as a result of it. But anyway, his protest was to throw the hourglass out of the window. The event was not a spontaneous event. It was a planned event. And the late Effie Walks recalled that she was the only woman in the room, and it was she who mooted the idea that there needed to be something done more radically to demonstrate that the then minority-ruled government had to go. The demonstration was called to protest the drawing of the Boundaries Commission, which delineated the boundaries in 1965 under the new internal self-government constitution. Ministerial government had come to the Bahamas 1 year earlier on the 7th of January, 1964, and the Constituencies Commission had a remit to draw the boundaries. The new commission was to draw the boundaries on the basis of constituencies being more or less equal, and then taking into account the remoteness and geographical features of the country. This is still the formulation which is followed today. The new formulation came following the defeat of the Progressive Liberal Party in 1962, when they received the lion's share of the votes but lost the majority of the seats. The seat count was in favor of the Out Islands, but the majority of the population, of course, lived in New Providence. Dame Doris Johnson has to be credited with the creation of a construct in her book, The Quiet Revolution, which traces the start of the modern political era in the Bahamas to the Burma Road riots of 1942, which took place on the 1st and 2nd of June of that year. Sir Randall Fawkes in his book agreed, and so have most of the Bahamian historians of the left. There are several markers from 1942 to the coming of majority rule on the 10th of January 1967 and independence on the 10th of July 1973. And they are the Citizens Committee fight in 1950 to reverse the ban on the showing of Sidney Poitier's first film, No Way Out, the founding of the Progressive Liberal Party in 1953, the election of the first political party in the House in 1956, the general strike of 1958, women receiving the vote in 1962, Black Tuesday on the 27th of April 1965, and Majority Rule Day on the 10th of January 1967. Following that came the sweeping election of the 10th of April 1968, when the PLP's popularity was at its highest. With that majority, the Constitution was amended in 1969 to allow for the voting age in the country to be lowered to 18 from 21. And ultimately, on the 10th of July, 1973, came national independence. It is important to remember and recall the square outside was crowded on that day. And so Lyndon Pindling told me that they did not really expect a crowd that day. They actually didn't know what to expect. They just made a general announcement. And in fact, most of the people in the square were spectators who had simply come to see what was happening. He said he and his followers recall that in 1942, he was 12 years old at the time in Western Junior School, and the riots had started in Nassau because there was a Coca-Cola truck parked in the streets on Bay Street with bottles on the truck, and the bottles were used as missiles to start the riot. And he said that in planning the event, they determined that there would be no riot. So after sitting down on Bay Street following the defenestration of the mace, he led his followers to a rally at the Southern Recreation Grounds. John Bailey, an Irishman, was the magistrate that day. And he told me he was called to read the Riot Act, and there's a picture of him standing on a police van doing so. He said that actually he got the job because he was the only one left, because the black magistrates had left for the day, presumably because they knew the event was about to take place in the face of the crowds. So I asked the late Eugene DePuch, QC, a minister of the UBP government at the time, why the UBP did not prosecute the PLPs for the act. And he said that his government saw it as a political act and not as an act of sedition. Following the events of Black Tuesday, there was an ideological split in the PLP. So Orville Turnquest, Paul Adley, and Spurgeon Bethel, who were all members of the House of Assembly, did not agree to boycott the House of Assembly, which the PLP decided as a party to do after the 27th of April, 1965. And those three men had not been told in advance because it was believed by the planners that they would seek to dissuade them from acting. So those three members of the House of Assembly went back to the House and ended up being suspended by the PLP, and they formed their own party called the National Democratic Party, or NDP. The PLP's numbers in the House were reduced then to Lyndon Pindling, Milo Butler, Arthur Hanna, Clarence Bain. That was 4 people. Cyril Stevenson had resigned, and the other 3 had been suspended, and Randall Fox had left to be the sole member for the Labour Party. Yet, within 2 years, the tables turned and the PLP was in the seat of government. History is important, and on 2 occasions, in 2017 and in 1997, as a member of the PLP, when all appeared lost, I pointed out that fact, and I repeat today. Elections are only a snapshot of what people feel on the day they go to the polls. And Michael Manley told me, in the midst of his defeat in 1980, we routed them before, we can rout them again. Black Tuesday, 27th April 1965, was a step on the way to majority rule. So today, we remember the heroes of that day: Lyndon Pindling, Milo Butler, Cecil Wallace Whitfield, Arthur Folks, and yes, Effie Walks, and the countless unnamed souls who joined the fight. And I remember, in particular, my late friend, the mother of Arthur Mabeau, Ena Hepburn, who, so Lyndon Pindling recalled, sat next to him in her brand new white suit on Bay Street on that day. So we remember them all. God bless them. God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communications be brought up. All the documents, all of the communications will lie on the table. Further communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign, seat, and new writs. Presentations of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Isles.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I firstly give thanks to Almighty God, who has made it possible for all of us to be here today. I'm thankful and grateful to him for touching the hearts of the people of the great constituency of Golden Isles, on whose shoulders I stand, and having this opportunity to represent them in this place another time. Mr. Speaker, today, with the second reading of this historic Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiatives bill, it is an honor for me Mr. Speaker, a bill for an act to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emissions. It's an honor for me, Mr. Speaker. This bill was tabled last week by the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador, our Prime Minister, who at this moment is making an historic presentation at the opening of the FDX conference, and so I stand today in his stead. Mr. Speaker, I rise again to introduce this bill, which we have great anticipation for, and we believe will be a landmark to benefit our Bahamas. The Climate Change and the Carbon Initiatives Bill 2022 will position the Bahamas to participate in the global response to the threat of climate change in ways which will benefit our environment and eventually have monetary value. Mr. Speaker, numerous reports by the United Nations and many international organizations point to the role of carbon emissions in causing temperatures to rise on our planet. If I may quote one of the United Nations Climate Action Fact Sheets, and it reads, and I quote, in a 2018 report, thousands of scientists and government reviewers agreed that limiting global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade would help us avoid the worst climate impacts and maintain a livable climate. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the current path of carbon dioxide emissions could increase global temperature by as much as 4.4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. That is not good news. Since that end quote, since that 2018 report, climate risk has intensified and an appropriate response by leaders around the world has grown more urgent. It is for this reason that a growing coalition of countries have committed to reducing their carbon emissions to zero by the year 2050. One of the key outcomes of the discussions at COP26 in Glasgow was agreement that significant financial support is needed for development countries, and particularly small island development states, SIDS, who are on the front line of climate change. Our country and others are painfully faced with the reality of the need to mitigate and to adapt to the effects of climate change. Need I say, Hurricane Dorian is a harrowing reminder that the impact and the effect of climate change is real for Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, central to the agreement in Glasgow was the recognition that an important tool to support these efforts is engagement in carbon markets and the sale of carbon credits. Carbon markets set a price for a unit of carbon credits which can be traded between a buyer and a seller. Carbon markets are an important bridge to a net zero future. The verification process of carbon credits involves mapping out scientifically our mangroves, seagrasses, and forests that we have that are functioning or could function as a carbon sink, and that is functioning to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that is why we encourage persons to plant trees and not destroy, as is going on in some parts of our country, particularly in the southwestern section of New Providence. While this mapping and verification process is taking place, we need to set up the legal and financial frameworks that can ensure that any resulting carbon credits are managed in the best interest of the Bahamian people. This bill that we will debate in the House today is indeed intended to achieve just that. Mr. Speaker, the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiatives Bill 2022 is arranged over 8 parts. I will now provide a brief overview of the sections, highlighting some of the key points that I wish to draw to the attention of the honorable members. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, I wish to remind the honorable members of the point made earlier. Fundamentally, this bill seeks to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change in ways which will also be of practical benefit to the Bahamas. I trust that there's no one in this House who disagrees with the fundamental principle that carbon emissions are the main cause of climate change, and that as a low carbon emitting country, there is still a vital and active role that the Bahamas can play in this global effort. Mr. Speaker, therefore, this is why the government, that we have taken the bold step of codifying the Paris arrangement, the Paris Agreement into Bahamian law as outlined in Part 1, Part 4, and the first schedule of the bill. By doing so, we are signaling to the world that the articles and the principles enshrined in the Paris Arrangement excuse me, Pardon me. By doing so, we are signaling to the world that the articles and the principles enshrined in the Paris Agreement form a vital roadmap for urgent climate action and will ensure the protection of countries like the Bahamas, who stand at the front lines of the climate crisis. Mr. Speaker, to protect this important resource for the Bahamian people, Part 1 and Clause 3 of the bill ensures that all carbon credits identified in our nation remain the property of our country and therefore cannot be traded without the consent of the government of the Bahamas. In Part 1, Clause 4 of the bill, we transparently outline our national targets and modalities for addressing our commitments under the Paris Agreement, and they are namely A, to enable the Bahamas to attain its undertaking to achieve its greenhouse gas emissions target by the year 2030, as outlined in its 2015 Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs, and any future emissions targets. B, to enable the government to create incentives and implement initiatives to support the overall global target of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. C, to ensure compliance by the Bahamas of its obligations under the Paris Agreement. And D, to enable the establishment of a market in the Bahamas to trade in carbon credits. Mr. Speaker, that's big, that's huge. Part 2 of the bill provides for the administration of the act. Firstly, of note, there is shared ministerial responsibilities for this bill between the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of the Environment, denoted in Clause 5 of the bill. Firstly, addressing the climate will take focused attention and leadership from the highest level of government. Moreover, the Prime Minister, who has responsibility for crown lands and seabeds, for which our country may utilize to generate carbon credits, it was for this reason that the Prime Minister is tasked with the overall administration of this bill. Secondly, given that the trade of carbon credits will generate additional revenue for our country and levies associated with the sale of these credits that must be tracked and paid, it is vital that the Minister of Finance be involved in this aspect of the bill's administration. And finally, as reporting on the environment, including our key country reports to the United Nations climate change body, is required, it is then vital that the Minister of the Environment be involved in this bill's administration, as my ministry has responsibility for natural resources such as the forest and mangroves, which capture and store carbon from the atmosphere. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, the administration of this bill also includes the appointment of a management company, of which its scope and functions are specified in clauses 6 through 8. As our country embarks on this new field, we have to do it right, and we have to do it right the first time for the benefit of our people. This is why This company must have expertise in the environmental field and the financial markets. Their work must be based in the science first and will be independently verified. Number 3, Clause 9, and the second schedule outlines the appointment and functions of an advisory council, which shall have responsibility for serving as a technical advisory body to the management company. Mr. Speaker, persons appointed to this council must have specific technical skills based in the sciences, conservation, carbon markets, law, financial investments, reporting mechanisms under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, and in other areas. In short, this council must be populated by experts and nothing short of that. Parts 3 and 4, clauses 11 through 18, provide the framework for the fundamental principles governing trade in carbon markets. These are required to meet the obligations of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the necessary actions required for our obligations under the Paris Agreement. These commitments set out the requirements for an internationally recognized carbon credit marketplace. It is worth noting that these includes provisions for A, all transactions in carbon trading as carried out under this bill must result in the additional effect of a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. B, all carbon offset projects should ensure that emissions are kept out of the atmosphere for a reasonable length of time. And C, all emission reductions must be carefully recorded and documented for every offset scheme, utilizing appropriate accounting terms, corresponding adjustments, and the location of offset as required by the UNFCCC and other standard bodies. A very important component of a successful carbon credit regime and compliance with our international commitments requires the Bahamas to put in place a framework and incentives for the reduction of emissions. Provisions for such a framework are found in Part 5, clauses 19 through 21. Of note, this framework will incentivize the trade of carbon credits and will regulate such activities through the issuance of permits. Mr. Speaker, Part 6 of the bill provides for the various options for participation in the carbon market in the Bahamas. The 3 options available allow for participation as a result of a bilateral or a multilateral trading agreement, as a result of trading with a private entity, and in a voluntary carbon market. Part 7, clauses 27 and 28. It provides for the establishment of a national emissions registry and for the appointment of a registrar. The registrar will record items material to the implementation of the Act and keep track of our international obligations, including emissions, carbon credit inventories, and emission allocations. The final part of the bill, Part 8, provides for certain miscellaneous provisions such as the need for confidentiality by those persons carrying out certain functions on behalf of the government, and for further regulation-making powers by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, by participating in and benefiting from the trade of carbon credits, the Bahamas will not be standing idly by, hoping that the rest of the world does right by us. This bill will ensure that science and environmental protection will serve as the foundation for addressing climate crisis. This bill will encourage us to positively engage with high carbon emitting countries and companies for our benefit. Mr. Speaker, this bill will ensure that the financial benefits arising from the trade in carbon credits will be regulated, will be well run, and will be well managed. And in aligning with the best practices established by the international agreements of which we are a part of, this bill will even further enhance the standing and reputation of the Bahamas as a good place to do business. Mr. Speaker, several weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be a part of a delegation traveling to Gabon, Libreville, Gabon, on the coast of West Africa. And Mr. Speaker, when I said to persons that I was going to Gabon in Africa, firstly, they had never heard of Gabon. And secondly, they wanted to know why Africa? See, Mr. Speaker, the international media has painted a very negative picture of Africa. In some instances, true. And it's one that leaders are corrupt, the countries are impoverished, and there's no need to go there. But Mr. Speaker, our time in Gabon, too short, very hectic, extremely hectic, but it left me with a lasting impression. Firstly, they made it clear that they were able to achieve what they've achieved and to be positioned to achieve what they will achieve because of good governance and stellar leadership. Mr. Speaker, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, we were part of the bodies that ratified it in 1992. The Minister of Environment informed me that since Copenhagen, that Gabon, they've been gathering data consistently. And he said they had constantly be fighting the image from outside nations. They were trying to put the stigma on them that they were corrupt. And they had to keep fighting the image and remain focused. And Mr. Speaker, today, because of the stellar leadership, because of their commitment, because of their discipline, because of them being resolute, they are positioned to benefit tremendously. Tremendously. And Mr. Speaker, I believe in the evening, as we were preparing to leave, I stood in the hotel room and I said, God, I thank you for bringing me The persons who know me, I'm a Pan-Africanist at heart. I believe in the struggle and the eventual victory for black people all over the world. And to stand in a black country, to see that they got it right, they were doing it right, they were consistent, disciplined, stuck to the vision with focus. I said, I must recommit myself that under the stellar leadership of our leader in our country, Gabon has been independent, I think, since 1958, we attained our independence in 1973. And I said, if they could do this, I know we can do this. And I said, be it resolved to myself that every ounce of energy, strength, iota, with everything that God has placed within me, I will fight, I will push, I will press to see to it that in the midst of all the opportunities that we will have as a result of this carbon credits exchange and other opportunities that will emerge, I believe, when we look back in the annals of history, we will realize that this day, this historic day, this historic bill would indeed have been a landmark one and would indeed contribute tremendously to the forward progress of our country as we continue to go forward, upward, and onward together. I commend this bill to this House, and may Almighty God, Yahweh Elohim, continue to bless our wonderful Commonwealth of the Bahamas and make the wealth more common. I thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes, the chair recognizes the honorable member for South and Central Andros.
I second the bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is always a pleasure to stand and represent the great people of Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros. And I am once again grateful to stand and second and to give my contribution to this honorable House on the bill to give effect to the Paris Agreement and to create initiatives to offset carbon emissions. But first, I want to congratulate two of our athletes, Mr. Kendrick Thompson and Ms. Annie Mackey of Central Andros, who represented the Bahamas extraordinarily well on the world stage. I would also like to wish a happy birthday to my youngest princess, Lauren, who celebrated her birthday yesterday, and would also like to congratulate my oldest daughter, who will be graduating from Broward College next week at the age of 18, after entering the college at 15. Mr. Speaker, we continue to hold our monthly meetings where we update the residents on community events and other solutions to the challenges that each town faces. Another meeting will be held tomorrow in Central Andros, to which I invite all residents to attend, as there will be various presentations made. I'd also like at this time to recognize the great students of South Andros High School that planted some trees during Earth Day, which leads me into my presentation, Mr. Speaker. This bill is an important step in charting the course for the future sustainability of our country. Not only are we declaring the steps we are taking to mitigate the effects of climate change, but also our strategy in building resilience to adapt in the face of rising temperatures. Mr. Speaker, we have already seen the effects of climate change in our shifting weather patterns, unusual weather phenomena, and stronger, deadlier storms. Through this bill, the New Day government will be setting the stage to diversify our economy through the establishment of our country's carbon market. The world is changing, Mr. Speaker, and with any type of change, there are leaders and there are followers. The Bahamas has historically shown itself to be a leader. We are a leading luxury island destination. We are leaders in sports, track and field events, and swimming. We are leaders in launching a sovereign digital currency. And now, Mr. Speaker, we are leaders in a new marketplace, one where the deposits and investments are focused on sustainable and actionable measures, what we take to ensure that the earth is a livable, comfortable place for our future and our future generations. It is fitting, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is debated just as we recognize Earth Day on April the 22nd, a day to remind us that we must do our part in preserving planet Earth. This year's theme, Invest in Our Planet, is serendipitous. The focus this year is on encouraging individuals, businesses, and world leaders to invest and switch to greener technologies and practices. And here we are, Mr. Speaker, engaging in this honorable House on a framework to encourage investments to offset carbon emissions. Mr. Speaker, we accepted the Paris Agreement, which came into effect in 2016. In this agreement, countries aim at the reduction of greenhouse gases through economic and social transformation. The United Nations notes that not all developing countries have sufficient capacities to deal with many of the challenges brought by climate change. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, one of the focal points of the Paris Agreement is on the capacity building and allows more developed countries to enhance their support for countries like ours. At the Climate Change Conference in November 2021, our Prime Minister, the Minister and Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador led a charge to all stakeholders to cease the sharp talking and take decisive action in assisting smaller countries in combating climate change. With the passing of this bill, Mr. Speaker, the Davis administration will show the world that we will also do not sharp talk, but we act swiftly and determinedly to structure and implement our carbon market system. Globally, new challenges and new produce, new markets, and the effect of the climate crisis is no exception. The renewed interest in carbon markets is fairly new. However, international carbon trading has been around since the Kyoto Protocols in 1997. It is the emergence of new regional markets that have prompted a surge in interest and investment potential. Along with this, we have also seen changing public attitudes on climate change and carbon emissions. These factors have led to governments looking to provide frameworks and incentives to develop the capacity for such laws and investment strategies. With this bill, Mr. Speaker, we present our Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, as mandated by the Paris Agreement, which is our action plan to build resilience, to adapt to the impact of rising temperatures. The Paris Agreement mandates us to set our strategy to achieve the balance between adaptation and mitigation. Our country is especially vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, and we also have significant capacity constraints. The UN Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and Article 9 of the Paris Agreement call for financial assistance from countries with more financial resources to those that are less endowed and more vulnerable. This recognizes that the contribution of countries to climate change and their capacity to prevent it and cope with its consequences vary enormously. Climate finance is needed for climate change mitigation because large-scale investments are required to significantly reduce carbon emissions. Climate finance is especially important for climate change adaptation, as significant financial resources are needed to adapt to the adverse effects and reduce the impacts of it. Therefore, the second part of this bill, which allows for incentives for offsetting carbon emissions, is a key component in our adaptation model. Mr. Speaker, at the Climate Change Summit in November 2021, nearly 200 countries agreed to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, allowing for the purchase of carbon offsets, credits that represent emissions reductions from many countries. This will bring forth new technologies and new initiatives that protect our natural forests, enhance our renewable energy infrastructure, and implement innovative technologies that allow the Bahamas to participate in the healing and restoration of planet Earth. In consideration of our natural forests, Mr. Speaker, it must be emphasized that these play an important role in our efforts to provide carbon credits through their use as carbon sinks. The Bahamas National Trust emphasizes that our national parks are defenders of the environment. Forests store carbon by capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and transforming it into biomass through photosynthesis. Depending on their characteristics and local circumstances, forests can play different roles in the carbon cycle, from net emitters to net sinks of carbon. In cases where the net balance of carbon emissions by forests is negative, forests contribute to the mitigating carbon emissions by acting as both a carbon reservoir and a tool to sequester additional carbon. On the other hand, in cases when the net balance of carbon emissions is positive, forests contribute to enhancing greenhouse effect and climate change. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that the passage of this bill allows for the country to channel the funds received into the maintenance of our natural forests and the future development of technologies such as a national forest carbon monitoring system. I'm also proud to say that the island of Andros hosts 5 of our country's national parks. This positions the entire island to be a model for any future climate-based initiative that is developed by this or future governments. Mr. Speaker, I wish to directly speak to the people of Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros, who I know are listening in, as I provide the premise of the significance of this bill and how it will affect them. By definition, a carbon sink is a natural or artificial reservoir that absorbs and stores atmospheric carbon through physical or biological mechanisms. Carbon sinks are found in vegetation, like our forest, and in the ocean, especially where there are significant amounts of limestone rock. Mangroves, seabeds, and salt marshes are also regarded as significant carbon sinks. And these particular examples, Mr. Speaker, store at least 10 times more carbon than the forests. However, we have seen an inverse effect in the Bahamas as our coastal ecosystems, the very ones that are needed to help mitigate the effects of climate change, as they are being destroyed by major storms enhanced by climate change. Therefore, ecosystem restoration is a priority to improve storage of carbon excessively released into the atmosphere and requires ambitious policies like this one today that is being debated. Through this bill, we open the market to transform the way we care about our seabeds, ocean floors, soil, forests, and our land. Mr. Speaker, this bill will also establish a national emissions registry, which will provide the framework for how carbon credits will be permitted, issued, recognized, and how they will be transferred. All marketplaces require a hub for buyers and sellers to hold and exchange assets. A carbon market is no different, and the National Emissions Registry is an important element of that marketplace. The registry, Mr. Speaker, will allow for the accurate accounting of carbon emissions, reflecting real-world greenhouse gas emissions and removals from the atmosphere. In doing so, Mr. Speaker, the government will have an accurate and transparent real-world picture of how our carbon emissions and carbon are captured. The Act calls for all transactions in carbon trading to result in the reduction of greenhouse gases. Different types of businesses, through innovation and new technologies, can utilize their carbon credits to reduce, capture, or store carbon emissions. Some of the more popular types of offsetting projects involve renewable energy projects, improving energy efficiency, carbon capture and sequestration, land use and reforestation. Renewable energy products, Mr. Speaker, have existed long before carbon credits markets became. Many countries are blessed with a natural wealth of renewable energy resources, which can be used as a low-cost source of power generation. Within the scope of this bill, renewable energy projects can provide an added benefit of carbon offset creation. Complementary to renewable energy products are energy-efficient projects. Mr. Speaker, innovative projects can reduce the energy demands of current buildings and infrastructure. The public is greatly aware of small steps to become energy efficient, in the vein of swapping out incandescent light bulbs to those that are highly efficient. Those who cannot afford it have started to do the same with their air conditioning units. Homes and buildings are now being outfitted with energy efficient windows as they are being constructed. We can all take these smaller individual steps and adapt this concept to industrial processes, renovating buildings, and the distribution of energy efficient appliances to those less fortunate. In this way, Mr. Speaker, we make everyone responsible and accountable for protecting the planet. Regarding reforestation projects, we can utilize the natural carbon sinks, like those found in Andros, to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. These projects include the protection and restoration of our forests, the creation of new forests and soil management, as carbon-enriched soil enhances crop production while also reducing pollution. We must also not forget, Mr. Speaker, our mangrove forests and their importance. Mangroves live 30% above the water and 70% below the water. They can survive in flooded coastal environments where seawater and freshwater meet. Not only do they create shelter and food for species such as sea turtles, they also provide a valuable lifeline to corals, algae, and other marine life. Therefore, the complementary nature of the land and the sea in offsetting carbon emissions provide an extensive landscape for carbon sink management. Through the purchase, sale, and transfer of carbon credits, we can now invite companies and organizations to fund our wind, hydro, and solar power generation. We can now invest in mangrove restoration. we can focus more of our attention on conservation through innovation. In essence, Mr. Speaker, this bill opens up a whole new world in future education, businesses, and economic advancement for our country. I speak to the citizens and residents of the Bahamas, but especially to those in Andros. This bill, Mr. Speaker, opens up a whole new world in future education, business, and economic advancement for our country. Through the passing of this bill, this New Day government is presenting a bottom-up framework for how we want our land to be managed and conserved. We owe it to our future, Mr. Speaker. With the Davis administration, it is truly about our future. I second this bill, Mr. Speaker, and thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member, South and Central Andros. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emission. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise this morning grateful to Almighty God for once again giving me the breath and the opportunity to stand before this honorable place and stand in this honorable place. And I'm continuously grateful that I continue to wake up in what I will always contend is the greatest country in the world, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I'm mindful that even on my best day, that I need God just as much as I need him on my worst day. Mr. Deputy, before I get into the bill at hand, I wish to offer some sentiments for this body here this morning that I feel is very, very appropriate. I had the opportunity about 2 weeks ago to give remarks at the 187th session of the Zion Baptist Convention, and it was under the theme, Repairers of the Breach, taken from the book of Isaiah. And I stand here this morning, Mr. Deputy, to say that there is a breach that we must repair. And that is the fact that we have thousands of Bahamians in all of our constituencies who are hurting in this inflationary environment, who continues to battle with increases in gasoline and food costs. And we've said this over and over again. And let me also just say, I do not believe, and I'm not arrogant enough to believe, that I have a monopoly on caring for the Bahamian people. But there is no doubt that a decision must be made to bring some relief to the Bahamian people and take VAT off of bread basket items as quickly as we can, because the Bahamian people need it, Mr. Deputy. You saw yesterday that the United States would projected a trucking recession, meaning that there will be added pressures to the supply chain, the global supply chain. So we're asking the government to take VAT off of bread basket items, bring some relief to the Bahamian people. And the truth is, Mr. Deputy, all of us in here have thousands of constituents, I'm sure, that message them every single day every constituency to talk about the great burden and how difficult it is to survive right now. And while, Mr. Deputy, the government cannot be held responsible for the external factors, global factors that come to our doorstep. The government can be responsible in their response to the cries of the Bahamian people and the difficulty they're facing right now, making life decisions on what they eat and how much they can eat. And I know in my constituency, persons are messaging me on a daily basis, some battling to have their $20 stretch to get what they need for their families. And oftentimes we come in here, Mr. Deputy, with great haste, maybe justifiably so, to move on pieces of legislation because certain elements demand it. And I believe in this case, this is something that we must move on, Mr. Deputy, and that we must come in here and make those changes to bring those relief to the poor, working class, and middle class Bahamians who are out there struggling. And as I said in that theme that I was exposed to 2 weeks ago, to be repairers of this breach and bring relief to the Bahamian people, Mr. Deputy. Yes, sir. Mr. Deputy, this topic about the environment, climate change, and all other interrelated topics is something that's obviously very important to the Bahamian people. And I wish to say, as we get into the matter at hand, that for too long, Bahamians have been desperately seeking to get some justice on the natural resources and our patronage and how much we benefit from it, how it's being facilitated, how it's being applied, the execution of the use of our natural resources. And I believe, Mr. Deputy, it is something that we must, again, as legislators and all Bahamians, truly embrace, that Bahamians out there are feeling that they're not getting their fair share or that an injustice has been placed upon them as it relates to their natural resources, Mr. Deputy. And in the last administration, or the last session of this Parliament, I had the opportunity, along with the member for Golden Isles, to be a member of an historic select committee on natural resources. And I believe, Mr. Deputy, with all of the issues of Crown land and all of the issues of how we're using our natural resources, the work of that committee was obviously not finished. And I believe that this body should reconstitute that select committee on natural resources so that the Bahamian people can know exactly what's happening with its natural resources and also how it's being all the monetary benefits, where it's going, who it's going to, and where it should be going, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, as we discuss this carbon credits, I think about the fact that the idea of climate justice is something that has come front and center for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. As we know, we are, as was mentioned earlier, at the forefront of the impact of climate change. And the fact is, and the truth is, as we all know, the greatest emitters are not the small island developing states like the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and others. It is wealthier nations. And so I believe that we must continue in regional and global forms, Mr. Deputy, to press these wealthier nations on this, continue to press them to lead and to take responsibility. At the end of the day, these issues with climate change threaten the existence of all small island development states, particularly like the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, threatens our existence. And so we cannot shun nor shy away from this great responsibility that we have to put, if you will, pressure on these great contributors of these emissions, because at the end of the day, it's about the survival of our people and the survival of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Deputy, the Free National Movement has always considered the environment very important and would have ensured that set aside more land and seabeds than any other administration, reflecting our commitment to the environment. Even in the managing of the landfill, Mr. Deputy, that reduced the methane in our environment. And so we are grateful. We are proud of the level of commitment and the level of work put in by the prior government, the previous government, in laying some very important framework for where we are headed now as it relates to our environment. The bill at hand, Mr. Deputy, is a step in the right direction, While there are certain concerns that linger, even as it relates to the carbon credit market, these are usually restricted funds that cannot be put into the consolidated fund. And so we must look at how will this legislation, how will that important aspect be impacted by this legislation. The opportunity to monetize our natural resources is something that is vitally important to the Bahamian people. And we hope that as we move forward in this manner, we hope that we do see the dividends. I know that there are some thoughts and legitimate concerns about how quickly will we see, how quickly will the Bahamian people, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, see the benefits of such a system. There's a number of things that have to be done relative to mapping, and so that is something that we are looking forward to seeing. But Mr. Deputy, we see this as an opportunity. If advanced properly, to bring some relief to the fiscal stress that is out there. And again, we want to continue, Mr. Deputy, we want to continue to press our global partners on climate change and ensure that there's some climate justice, particularly that we are on the negative end of that, and ensure that they are ultimately responsible for their contribution to what's happening in our world. If I also may say so too, Mr. Deputy, and this is in keeping with the larger discussion about our environment, that every day we drive around the island of New Providence, and the great deal of insensitivity, carelessness, and disregard that some of our citizens operate with as it relates to littering in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It is something that continues to remain shameful, and we must hold each other accountable and hold each other into account for this continuing defacing of open areas and green areas in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we must press upon the Royal Bahamas Police Force to be just as aggressive in other areas, to ensure that the laws are enforced as it relates to pollution and littering. Oftentimes you can be driving on the highway and you can see trucks and vehicles not covered, and The trash and everything is flying off of the vehicle into our streets. These are things that we need to do a better job of. And again, hold each other into account as fellow citizens and ensure that the bodies that are responsible for enforcing these laws are doing so for the benefit of our environment. We know that we have a beautiful country, I say the most beautiful country in the world. And it's both the comprehensive measures, as we are talking about today, as well as the everyday occurrences that will make a difference and ensuring that we be proper caretakers of this beautiful country of ours. Mr. Deputy, before I take my seat, I would also like to give my condolences to the Willie family, who lost Jeffrey Willie. Jeffrey Willie, who has been a staple of the St. Barnabas constituency, the Southside Boys Junkanoo group on Wolf Road, opposite Pa B's there, and in particular, Paul Willie and Wes Willie, who I know very personally, and just would like to offer the Willie family sincere condolences on the passing of Jeffrey, also known as Gav. Also, Mr. Deputy, I would like to tell the people of St. Barnabas that I continue to be grateful for their support and that many things are happening. The community center is running its programs, and we're looking forward to having a Junkanoo workshop in the summer. And we're also looking forward for persons to continue to register for the continuing education program, adult education program, to give opportunities for persons to continue to develop themselves in a real and meaningful way. And Mr. Deputy, I wish to conclude where I started, which is the Bahamian people are out there hurting and desperately need relief. Desperately need relief, Mr. Deputy. Go no further in the food stores and you can hear the cries of the people at the cash registers, and definitely can hear the cries of the people at the gas pump. We have an obligation, find a way to bring some relief, because they cannot carry the burden anymore. We continue to make sacrifices, and we continue to put the burden on the poor and the middle class, and working class Bahamians, and we must do something about it. We are making decisions every day. We are making decisions every day. The government is making decisions every day as it relates to finding relief in many different forms and ways. But the biggest relief that's needed is to the thousands of Bahamians who are hurting out there every single day, Mr. Deputy. I wish we had the time where I could read some of the messages that I get. It's harrowing to see what people are dealing with. And the government can act. We can act. The government can act. The government can come here today. The government can come here this afternoon. The government can come here this afternoon, and we can move VAT off of bread basket items, off of prescription drugs. I have a lady who called me the other day. She said, Mr. Cartwright, I can't get as many of my pills as I used to get, my blood pressure pills. We must do something. This is right. This is the right thing to do, and we call upon the government, right? We haven't heard any consideration of taking VAT off of bread basket items. I haven't heard one consideration of taking it off of bread basket items. The Bahamian people are hurting, and they expect us to do something, and we need to do something. Take VAT off of bread basket items. We can do it today. Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I am very privileged, proud, and honored to stand on behalf of the good people of Angliston.
Yes.
And I want to begin, because I don't want to muddy the water on this point, I want to begin by giving condolences to the speaker who lost her brother. And I know the feeling, having lost two brothers, and you know that the relationship between siblings is so unique, and a lot of people understate or don't understand that tight bond between siblings who grew up together and, you know, fought together and came of age together. And to lose one, it's a very startling experience. And so I know this is a very painful time for her, and I want to extend my condolences and love to her and her family. I also wanted to, I listened with interest to the member for St. Barnabas, and I'm just wondering, right, whether he has just arrived in the reality of what has been happening in this country. Oh, I mean, we spoke about it often. We went through a pandemic where it took 3 months before there was even an intervention, when the economy was shut down and people didn't have a dollar or a piece of bread. And people had to be innovative. I know in Engliston, we had to try find some solutions. I didn't hear St. Barnabas crying for the poor. Medication, I've been dealing with that issue for an extended period about people not being able to access medication. And so while I do not disagree that there is a level of hardship, I endorse that. But I am utterly shocked at this awakening to the experience of people in these communities, and many of whom are in St. Barnabas. No, what is this, a point of order? What is it?
The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
Mr. Deputy, let me just say this.
Is it a point of order, Mr. Deputy?
Is this a point of order?
Yes. Let me just say this.
What is the point of order?
Let me just say this. Let me just say this. Persons who know this member.
Let me hear.
Persons who know this member, all across St. Barnabas and all across this country, know that this member, and I'm going to say my name, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, cares about the poor. The question is, what is the government going to do now? This revisionist history, this revising, take VAT off of bread basket items.
Yes, yeah, hold on. We have to
take VAT off of bread basket items.
Okay, we got to get to the point of order, though.
How can you govern looking backwards? Let's look forward.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Yeah, hold on a minute. I think.
Let's look forward.
Member. 1 minute. Let me give me the floor. Give me the floor. Yes, just give me the floor a minute. Give me the floor a minute. Sir. Member. Let me.
Secondly, I make my point again. This
member for Anglican.
Yes,
let me just make a point.
Yes.
A point of order, not because you have a difference of opinion, that's not a point of order. So I just need you, if you stand on a point of order, make sure it's a point of order and not a difference of opinion. Please.
And you know, the posturing, no disrespect. Some of us can see through posturing. I am making my contribution now, and I know the people of this country have been suffering for an extended period, and the member for St. Barnabas, with his earnest contribution, I never heard him speak as if this is some new phenomenon because he wants to make a political point. He did. I don't remember this member. This member. Listen.
Rebuttal time.
But it's not But it's not a point of order.
Throughout my time,
I'm not using my timing.
elective office, is that I've always fought for the poor, the middle class, and working class behavior.
Okay,
and the government
you're a great guy. May I finish my contribution?
Is trying to deflect from the obligation, that the Bahamian people expect from the government to bring relief, then that the member can continue to do so. But to continue to go back, you are the government. And on many occasions, I heard the honorable member, with all due respect, I heard the honorable member say it's your job, fix it. So I say to the honorable member, you'll fix it.
This is not Hollywood. Hollywood ain't in the parliament now. Hollywood ain't in the parliament. Hollywood is not in the parliament. I am making my contribution. Sit down. Sit down. down. Sit down.
Members,
Sit down.
the member for St. Barnabas, the member for St. Barnabas, Anglican has the floor. Yes,
Not a point of
You know,
yes, but St. Barnabas, yes, yes.
listen, I don't want this member. See, this member believes I'm a light target. And I don't want him to get mixed up. Don't get mixed up in here. This member sat in the parliament and voted for an increase in VAT from 7.5% to 12% across the board. The record reflects. The record. Now he's talking. No.
It's not a point of
Members, no, St. Barnabas, no.
Forget it today.
No, one minute.
Forget it today.
Now, Anglican has the floor, and that's it. Now, she has 27 minutes and 43 seconds. She will not be interrupted by no one. Let's please respect. Thank you. Anglican, you have the floor.
Thank you.
No, I already made my... Anglican have the floor. This is not a contentious bill. We are not here to be contentious today. Please don't waste my time and the Bahamian people's time. Anglican has the floor.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And that's it. Thank you.
I'm wondering why this member believes that I don't have a right to speak in this parliament. He sat there and made all his speech. I'm now making mine, and he got to get up every little second, every minute. No, you know what's the speaker here? Sit down. Sit down.
Please,
Oh?
Mr. Speaker.
His ego?
Anglican has the floor. I will let you, as soon as she's finished, I will give you 2 minutes
Mr. Deputy?
to rebut what she's saying.
Rebut. I'll rebut his rebuttal.
There are no rules for rebuttal. You have to do it within the rules.
Anglican has the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie.
Speak once over the debate. Only once. That's what the rules say. You don't have
Mr.
to.
Deputy, I'm wondering if this member,
Please.
Anglican, has the right to speak, my brother. And you have been interrupting me continuously. That member sat in this parliament and voted on the record for the increase of that from 7.5% to 12% on every single item, including breadbasket items. And so the member now to come in here with some, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know how to describe it. Listen, you cannot defend yourself. No, I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding.
I have already made my ruling. That's Anglican has the floor for another 26 minutes and 54 seconds. Can you please give yes? And first of all, St. Barnabas, you introduced this
Yes, he
content.
introduced it.
So you put it on the floor, so leave it. I'm going to give you the opportunity. I am going to give you the opportunity in 26 minutes and 54 seconds. You will have your opportunity.
I'm wondering, let me tell you, Mr. Deputy, the Bahamian people are very, very perceptive. And all this jumping up and all of this is defensive. As you rightly pointed out, Mr. Deputy, you introduce it. You make your political point. It's now being responded to, and you can't handle it. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Wrong place at the wrong time. You're up again.
That's not a point of order. So come on, man. It's a point of order. Otherwise, sit down.
St. Barnabas, I already made a ruling 3 times.
Come on, Mr. Speaker.
I will have the Sergeant of Arms. I will have the Sergeant of Arms remove you from this house if you need to call off. I already made a ruling 3 times. 3 times. 3 times. It would not be a 4th time. It would not be a 4th time in the house. Sergeant of Arms, I am putting you on your guard to remove St. Barnabas if he cannot respect the rules of this house.
Stop profiling.
Now, I already made a ruling. Let me finish. Okay, members, honorable member for Marco City, can you please address the speaker? You have the.
Mr. Deputy, under the rules of the House, members are permitted to get up on a point of order. So a blanket ruling, Mr. Deputy. I know you have to demonstrate loyalty to leadership to be included, but don't do it at my expense. Don't do it at my expense, Mr. Deputy.
Go ahead.
Mr. Deputy, my understanding of the rules is that every member of this House is entitled to stand in the event that they have a point of order. And so it is within the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker's right.
Stand up plenty. I want you plenty.
Members, Marco City has the floor.
Therefore, it is within the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker's right to enforce that rule. To give a blanket ruling that someone cannot get up on a point of order until a speaker is through, I've not seen that anywhere in the rules of procedure. So what I'm saying is to then threaten a member that if they are getting up on a point of order, they will be removed is inconsistent with the rule. So again, the rule ought to be that it has to be, the interruption has to be consistent with the rule. But for you to now introduce a new rule, I'm taking issue with that, Mr. Deputy.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I said if he's rising on a point of order,
yeah,
it has to be a point of order, not an opinion.
That was not the point.
That's all I'm saying.
That is the point you're making.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
sir. Yes, that's all. Don't rise on an opinion, a point of order. The floor recognizes Angliston.
Yes, Mr. Deputy. I mean, the main people understand what time it is, what's happening in here. The member for St. Barnabas voted for the increase of VAT from 7.5% to 12% across the board on every single item. Every single individual member voted, and he's on the record supporting. Yep. Furthermore, that led to reduction in consumerism, a contraction of the economy, and what was then the highest cost of living in the history of this nation. Highest cost of living. So the member to come in here now as if it's all brand new, I'm quite shocked. I'm quite shocked. But in any event, I will just leave it there. But I think it's very important for the Bahamian people to know that everything must be contextualized and not conveniently positioned. Because this is not, what we are dealing with has been a continuing dilemma. And guess what? The people who've been experiencing it, they know what they've been through. They know, politician could tell them, something suddenly happened. They know what they have experienced over the last 2 years in this country, particularly during the pandemic. And so they know. And so this narrative, this political narrative that seeks to cast some bizarre reality which is not placed in its correct positioning is not going to be accepted by the Bahamian people because they know. These are tough times. These are tough times. And we have to do all that we can to improve the situation that people are experiencing in this country. But we do not need a manufactured perspective on where we are, because it's known, and this is not new. And we know who actually created the original dilemma in this country. We know. But in any event, Mr. Deputy, back to the bill. Thank you. I stand to support this legislation. I think it is so important on so many levels. First and foremost, and I think the member for South Andros explained it very well, it allows us to, it forces us almost to begin to have an organic understanding of our environment and a connectivity to our environment, an appreciation of things like the mangroves. There was a time in foreign direct investment, the mangroves were routinely cut down, destroyed. We saw in Louisiana with the Hurricane Katrina that was noted to be a significant factor in the flooding that took place because they cut the mangroves. And we are now garnering an appreciation, and more than an appreciation, a respect for mangroves and other aspects of our environment. And I think this legislation is very important because it forces us to have an appreciation and respect for our natural environment. And also it provides, the second component is that it provides it allows for a diversification of the economy. And this is something I think that we have to concentrate on much more. And this is the sort of advocacy I think we should be hearing in this parliament. What is it that we can do to cause for our economy to create a greater sense of equity for the Bahamian people, and to allow for better quality of life from the current paradigm, where many people feel as if there is a level of marginalization of average Bahamians in the economy. So moves that allow us to use our own resources, to leverage our resources in a way in which deepens the economic strength and viability. And not only that, in terms of this particular legislation, it rises us actually to the top in terms of our viability in this particular thing because of the carbon emissions that reflect globally and our masses of ocean that absorb these emissions. The Bahamas has become more critical in global affairs than almost anything, even though in tourism and other things we're way up there. But in this particular thing, in our natural environment that God has gifted us with as a people, in this legislation is being highlighted as an opportunity for our people to create economic paradigms to improve quality of life, at the same time garnering a respect for our environment. So this is a really critical piece of legislation, and in terms of what it can mean potentially for the Bahamian people and for the empowerment of the Bahamian people, for the protection of our environment. And I am very pleased to be able to support this, and I wish to congratulate the Prime Minister because he has gone out of the box and he has been an advocate globally, and he has become really a spokesman, and he has been raised in his advocacy globally for this important issue of climate change and the importance of the climate. The other issue I think we have to look at, and I know the member for Charlotte will speak, but we have to look at the issue of green energy. Excuse me. We have to see how we can now leverage our other natural resources, like the sun, like the water, to see how we can create new energy paradigms for the Bahamian people without using fossil fuels. So I think that this legislation puts front and center such a soulful intervention in how we see ourselves as a people and how we see our environment. And it also creates that economic diversification in a way in which we use our own resources in an unhampered way, in a way in which it's not exploited, it's not damaged, it's not exhausted, and it is actually through protection that we create an enhanced environmental reality for the Bahamian people. This is really an interesting juxtaposition that I think is very important for more and more Bahamians to understand and to embrace, and to see how we can make the most out of it for our people. Before I sit, Mr. Deputy, I wanted to also, I believe I missed the communication by the member for Fox Hill on Black Tuesday. And I wanted to also throw my voice in support of that. I actually wrote something in 1965, and I'm wondering if I, with the indulgence, 65. No, I wrote it in 2015. I couldn't write in 65, okay? I wish I could say I wasn't born, but I think I was born. But I wanted to take the liberty of sharing this. I hope you don't find it self-indulgent, but you do, thank you. Mr. Deputy, In the days leading up to the day that is now known in our history as Black Tuesday, the then Premier of the Bahamas, on hearing of rumors of trouble when Parliament was to meet, he was quoted in one of the national dailies as saying, and I quote, "We have for many years now been building a prosperous country." This is the UBP now saying this. "We have before us the opportunity to continue on this course, but everything can be ruined in a moment of careless and violent conduct. Do not be persuaded to take part in disturbances which will injure yourself and your family." Now that was a double-edged sword. They weren't talking about the physical disturbances. They were saying, you're getting them disturbances, you might pay a price at the highest levels. These comments were made in April of 1965 from the lips of a premier who was reinstated in the general election of 1962. In that election, women voted for the very first time. There was universal suffrage. The proportional voter turnout was higher than ever before. The Progressive Liberal Party garnered a total of 32,299 votes. The vote over the 26,826 polled by the United Bahamian Party. Yet, despite the popular vote victory, the voice of the people was made manifest in less seats for the PLP than they had held before the general election, falling from 10 seats to 8 seats, and the UBP returning 20 of the 33 seats in Parliament. The PLP gained a majority of the votes, but only a quarter of the seats. This remarkable result was made possible by what Lyndon Pindling, leader of the PLP, called an evil electoral system, enunciated by a number of strategies deployed by the then ruling UBP. The first and most important was the manipulation of constituency boundaries or gerrymandering, the disproportionate distribution of seats, where more seats existed in the out islands as compared to New Providence, which had a larger population with less seats. As it related to education, it has been described as at that time being, and I quote, intentionally underfunded. Only 6% of children went on to secondary school. The only government high school had an allocation of 100 for a school population of 30,000 children. Access to health care was constricted by lack of facilities throughout the country. The ordinary people suffered cruelly. The unjust setback of 1962 only further fueled a fervor that was brewing in the Bahamian electorate, the unrepresented masses. On 12th of June 1964, 3 women, Cat Island farmers, were sentenced to prison for contempt of court. Their names were Adeline and Brister and Janetta Roll, who were in prison for 28 days, and Virginia Roll for 21 days for obstructing the course of justice. The action involved a quieting action in which the petitioner was Cat Island Farms Limited, beneficially owned by Sir Harold Christie, the Member of Parliament for Cat Island. The women, his constituents, by the way, were represented by A.D. Hanna, Lyndon Pindling, Cecil Wallace Whitfield. The women were adverse claimants in the quieting action along with Mr. Christie. Quieting action. Mr. Christie began an action for trespass on a tract of land known as Old Bight against 25 residents. The adverse claimants claimed to have farmed the land in the settlement of their birth. The Member of Parliament had become a substantial landowner in his constituency, and indeed throughout the country. In Creighton and Saunders' book, A History of the Bahamian People, they describe this. For Christie, real estate was no more or less a commodity, a natural resource of tremendous potential for personal wealth and power. He is said to have had an unconscious ambition to take over the entire Bahamas, if only to divide it up again for sale and profit. The account further provides, and I quote, that Christie and his emulators took advantage not only of the demand, as time went on, cleverly stimulated by advertising, but of immensely favorable local circumstances, the shortage of money, the failure and hardship of traditional agriculture, the local farmers' ignorance of the value to others of their beachfront lands, muddled and tenuous titles, and an inefficient, if not actually corrupt, Surveyor General's Department and Registry. Over the years, Bahamian realtors built up a veritable land bank of properties, some bought at windfall prices, but most being items on which options and agency agreements were held. And I just stopped there to indicate this helps you to understand how land has been divested or acquired in the history of our people. In the headline in the Nassau Daily Tribune dated the 25th of June, 1964, headed, Uncontrolled Outbursts in House by Milo Butler. The article stated that an uncontrolled outburst by Mr. Milo Butler marred the solemnity of the occasion this morning in the House Assembly when tributes were paid to the late President of the Senate, Sir George Roberts, who died yesterday. Mr. Butler almost raised the roof when he said, "I have a very important matter to bring before you this morning." Continuing in his high-pitched voice, this is the Tribune saying this, Mr. Butler asserted, and I quote, that there are 3 colored women in our jail today, and our courts deny them an appeal. Mr. Butler referred to the denial of appeal as an injustice. On the 22nd of June, Hannah and Whitfield traveled to London at their own expense to the Privy Council, but the court records reportedly could not be found. These 3 poor Cat Island women came to symbolize, and do so to this day, the courageous defiance of the Bahamian women, standing up in the face of one of the most powerful men in the country at a time when victimization and intimidation, bribery, and retaliation was the order of the day. It's interesting that Mr. Christie became Sir Harold during that same year. He was knighted by the Queen. Women began to feature on the political spectrum with the beginning of the suffragette movement. Gail Saunders observes that Bahamians, and women in particular, remained politicized until the early 1950s. She asserts that women generally accepted the status quo, and it was not until the mid-1950s that the women's suffrage movement allied itself with the Progressive Liberal Party, the Bahamas' first political party established in 1953 to fight for the rights of Bahamians. She notes that women were granted the vote for the first time in the infamous 1962 elections. The movement involved cross-political involvement, but gained momentum under the leadership of Doris Johnson, who became their spokesman. The point I'm making thus far here, Mr. Deputy, is that this is the 1965 Black Tuesday had a burgeoning, growing political firestorm. And the 62 election with the gerrymandering and the undermining of democracy, where the Progressive Liberal Party got more votes, but less seats than they ever had, more votes than their opponents, and ended up with less seats. And then you had the corruption and the greed and the oppression, as I alluded to in education, that it was all of these things that were in the backdrop of the 1965 movement. On February 4th, 1965, the Constituency's Commission report was delivered. While New Providence contained more than 60% of the population, the Out Islands continued to almost doubly as well represented. During the debate, both Butler and Hannah were named and physically ejected from the House when they refused to abide by the 15-minute rule. This is when you stand for real things, Mr. Deputy. There's a difference, and the Bahamian people know the difference. Right. The debate continued on April 27th, 50 years ago. Well, that's more than 50 years, that's 55 years ago, 57 years ago. The Progressive Liberal Party determined that based upon the ignoble track record of the United Bahamian Party, which included not only corrupt practices in governance and the imposition of policies which subverted the natural and healthy development of an entire population, and having regard to the contradictory result of the 1962 general election, where the will of the people was subverted through electoral manipulation, that dramatic action would have to be executed. It was on this day, in the words of Sir Randall Fox, that the mace flew out of the window. It is reported the house was paralyzed in stunned silence. Activated in the square below, however, was a throng of people. They came from the east, they came from the north, and they came from the south. They demonstrated by sitting down defiantly in the square, refusing to be moved. Many of them were physically carried away by the police. A newspaper article carried on the following day noted that several women were among those lifted and carried away. In Dr. Gail Saunders' essay, she makes an observation that little has been written about Bahamian women. And she further notes there has been no systematic and detailed examination of women in Bahamian history. Because of this gross omission, we can only surmise. And I must say, Marion Bethel did a very important piece, Womanish Ways, which begins to analyze how women were involved. Yes. Because of this gross omission, we can only surmise. We know of the involvement of many women at the forefront. We look at the photographs and deduce, but the act of women sitting defiantly in protest in Rawson Square and having to be physically removed by the police spoke volumes of the substantive involvement of Bahamian women in the political struggle for freedom in our country. It brings to my mind, I think Mitchell told me this story, Fox Hill, the image of Bertha Isaacs riding her bicycle along Bay Street, the center of political power, exploitation, and spite, with a placard on the back of her bicycle, leading a small demonstration, ringing the bells on her bicycle, ringing out for freedom, with a small band marching behind her. This is the history of our people. Yes. Black Tuesday was the culmination of the absolute final resistance to oppression. And of course, in 1967, the Bahamian people spoke, and they spoke louder in 1968. And so, Mr. Deputy, I stand to salute those giants who sat in this parliament, who sat on the ground outside of this parliament. Lyndon Pindling, who threw the mace out, which he said was the symbol of authority of the Bahamian people, and that through it, it should be with the people. That this is one of the finest, most shining moments in the history of the Bahamian people. And it speaks to the fact that at the core of our yearnings as a people is one that is in pursuit of justice, in pursuit of equality, in pursuit of peace, and in pursuit of prosperity for our people. And so this day is perhaps one of the most important days, not the most, but one of the most important days in our history as a people. And it shows clearly that the Bahamian people have fought for their freedom. We have other examples in our history, but we are a people that have agitated for, fought for, gained and won the advances that we have made as a people. And it also tells us that there's still work that is left to be done, particularly on the issue of land. When we speak about Harold Christie and we see how he, in his own constituency, he was able to amass huge parcels of land, and in a quieting action which was fraught with controversy and injustice, take on his own constituents who were poor women farmers, and it ended up at his instance in their being imprisoned. It tells us that we have to look at the issue of land in this country, because the history of land in the Bahamas is one in which the masses have been alienated and excluded. And what we are saying now is just efforts now to cause for greater embracing of ownership, etc. But the history of the Bahamian people has been this, where land has been utilized as a symbol of wealth by an elite grouping. And The rest is history, sold and resold and resold. And you know, as Dr. Gail Sanders notes in her book, they took advantage, exploited people who didn't understand the value of their beachfront properties and didn't appreciate what it was that was happening, and lost their land for peanuts. Or in the case of those Cat Island women, lost their land and ended up in jail. So we have to, the 1965 experience continues to send messages to us and signals to us. And one of them is the issue of land ownership. The second one is an appreciation of the role of women in the political struggle. Yes. And we must never forget that the women of this country were hand in hand in all of the advances that were made for our people. And finally, it's a humbling experience because we are coming face to face, if only in memory, with our ancestors, our forefathers, foremothers, who were so incredibly focused, committed, pure, determined, sacrificial, courageous in the advancement of our cause. And that is why it is incumbent on all of us in this parliament, because those people sat right here where we have the privilege of sitting. That God has allowed us to sit. We are the successors to these giants. The obligation is on us to perpetuate the legacy, regardless of political division. We should be committed to perpetuating a legacy that is so committed to the well-being of our people and the advancement of our people. And so, Mr. Deputy, I am very privileged to be able to support this legislation and to say that this is indeed a really, really new paradigm. This is indeed a new paradigm on so many levels, multiple levels. But I also want to celebrate this important day in our history. And we got to learn more about our history. And we're going to do this in the schools. We're going to cause for our young people to understand they're not second-class citizens. They're not deficient. They come from a proud, I just described the proud legacy. They come from a proud, strong legacy. And that they are the inheritors of that. And you know, Mr. Deputy, they will be better than any of us can ever be. Yes. That is coming. But we want our children to understand their history. The people of Angleton support this legislation, and I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I'd just like to, 1 minute, Symbolis, you'll have your time. I would like for all members to either get out of your computers or get out of your phones. I need you to go to the rules of procedure of the Honorable House of Assembly of the Bahamas, because I think we need to read more. And that goes for all of us.
Thank you.
I think it was the member Fort Charlotte that brought this up, and it's the order of the House of Committee, 88, Section 2. The Speaker of the House of the Chairman of Committee, after having called the attention of the House of a Committee of the conduct of a member who persists in irrelevance or in tedious repetition, either of his own argument or of the arguments used by other members in the debate, may I direct the member to discontinue his speech and resume his seat. Section A, persistently and willfully obstructed the business of the House. C, persistently and willfully disregarded the authority of the chair. It all boils down to we have to follow the rules of the House. And after we follow the rules of the House, it all boils down to respect. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, let me just say, I meant no disrespect to the chair. And if the chair finds it, that I apologize. Passions can fly in here, as we all know. The Honorable Member for Angleton talked about context, which I wish to provide. First, let me just say, Mr. Deputy, I stand here as the re-elected member for St. Barnabas. Re-elected member, I'm making a point here. Re-elected member for St. Barnabas in what is deemed an inner city seat, some would say in the heart of the PLP. Meaning that the people that I represent, the people that I represent, I gave your people too, right? I gave your people too, right?
Yeah, the chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama. 1 minute.
Respect, Mr. Deputy. The member for St. Barnabas has already addressed this bill. He's already spoken to the bill that's before the House. We must move on and continue the debate. We must move on to continue the debate. If you've given the member, there's no rebuttal in the rules. But if you have given the member an opportunity to respond, we accept that. But, Madam Speaker, do not allow this House to find itself in a situation where we are having rebuttals, we're having double speeches, members are taking advantage of situations.
What I want to know is, why are you over there?
Mr. Deputy, the point I was making is that my representation of the lost, the least, and the left behind is obvious as I stand here as the re-elected member. Contextually, Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the Progressive Liberal Party put value-added tax on bread basket items in 2015. In 2018, the Free National Movement took VAT off of bread basket items. And in 2022, the Progressive Liberal Party put VAT back on bread basket items. That's the reality. The honorable member, the senior member, I would hear on a number of occasions, she would say, fix it. The Bahamian people made a decision. They have us over here, and they have the honorable members over there. Their job is to fix and address the relief of the Bahamian people, and all I'm saying is take VAT off of bread basket items. Thank you.
Exactly. The chair recognizes the member for Angliston.
The member missed a little piece out of history. And, that is when you want to create a narrative. What the member did not say is that when the PLP introduced VAT, it was across the board, 7.5%. The Bahamian people lived with it. This administration took office, increased it to 12% across the board on everything. It led to a contraction of the economy, a reduction in consumerism, and what was then described as the highest cost of living in the history of this country. Yeah. They subsequently claimed later and reduced it of what they call were bread basket items. But for everything else in this nation, where Bahamian pays VAT, they're paying more under that administration as a result of the increased pressure they put on the poor man in this country. So I want the members, yes, all those things are accurate. You missed that little piece in the middle there.
Thank you, member. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. When I graduated from Freeport High School in 1983, our graduation song was "Let There Be Peace on Earth," and let it begin with me. So, all of us. So, I hope that this is a peaceful presentation today. Yeah. I'm not going to get in family squabble. I understand that. So I'm not going to get in that. Mr. Deputy, thank you. As usual, I want to thank Almighty God for His grace and mercies for allowing me to see another day. I want to also thank the great constituents of Central Grand Bahama for electing me to represent them for a second term in this honorable House. Mr. Deputy, with your leave, I would like to offer sincere condolences to Madam Speaker on the passing of our brother. I know what it is like to lose a brother, and the family members throughout Central Grand Bahama and the Bahamas in general. Special condolences to the family of one Freddie Dean from Central Grand Bahama, a community builder in that area, who went from labor to reward this past Monday. Mr. Deputy, while you talk about persons being on their phone and on the computer, it looks like we have 3 or 4 meetings going on in the House at the same time. I want to say, when I was on my computer, I was putting some facts together for my presentation, so I apologize if I appeared to be distracted, but I was doing something that was substantive to my debate. I would also like to offer condolences to the Willie family of Jeff Willie, who's a good, like was mentioned by our deputy leader, who's a good fraternal brother of mine, good capper. And he's gone on to what we call Chapter Invisible. I would like to also wish speedy recovery to Ambassador Maurice Moore, who had a minor surgery a few weeks ago while he's now at home convalescing, and also to a constituent, Joel Russell, who had a heart attack a few weeks ago, but again, I visited him on this past Monday, and he's recovering at home very well. I wish today I was able to physically wish my parents happy anniversary. Today would have been their 63rd anniversary together on Earth, but since my mother passed in August, I guess I'll wish them a first happy anniversary in heaven today. For information purposes, I want to advise the constituents of Central Grand Bahama that the office is open on a daily basis from 10 o'clock until 2 p.m. daily to serve our community. By way of notice, our world famous Farmers Market Festival will be held this coming the 14th of May at our community park at the Royal Oasis. And I hope that during this installation, we will have members from the Ministry of Agriculture visit us, as well as BAIC and the good member from Fox Hill, who is often in Grand Bahama. Yeah, world famous, yeah, Central Grand Bahama Farmers Market Festival. Mr. Deputy, the bill before us today is very critical, and one that we must ensure that is done properly. First of all, for the protection of our people, and secondly, for the livelihood of our people. Mr. Deputy, we must therefore be careful, though, not to put the cart before the horse. We first of all must do an inventory of what assets we have, and therefore know what we need to protect. This is what will put us in an even better position to benefit from what I would call sustainable carbon credit. Mr. Deputy, as was alluded to earlier, one of our most valuable assets is the mangroves. And listen, I didn't say mango or mangrove. As we say in Bahamian time, I said the mangroves. Mr. Deputy, I did some research, like I said earlier, while I was on the computer, and I'd like to share some information with my colleagues. According to Joe Darwell of Waterkeepers, and I'd like to also offer condolences to him on the passing of his brother this week, the burial of his brother, rather, in Long Island. According to Joe Darwell and Google, the Bahamas is home of 3 species of mangroves: the red mangroves, the black mangroves, the white mangroves, and a member or an associate mangrove called the buttonwood. Mangroves deserve our protection as they provide many ecosystem services, including shoreline protection, carbon sequestration, and functioning as a nursery habitat for marine life. And also, growing up in Waterkey, I understand that they also serve as bird nesting areas. So they're very valuable. Mr. Deputy, as I said earlier, and I'll go into more explanation, the red mangroves, they are dark green with numerous small reddish-brown dots on the lower surface and a small deciduous pointed tip, look like a little pencil or pen that drops into the water. These mangroves have long roots above the ground, and the pencil-like element is called propagules, and they go up to some 30 centimeters or 12 inches before dropping from the tree to regenerate. We then have the black mangrove. They play an important role in erosion control. Looks more like a tree than the spidery red mangrove. The black mangroves have silvery green leaves and a dark trunk. And of course, these mangroves can go up 30 to 40 feet high. We then have the white mangroves. And these have the ability to survive, and these are very important, in waterlogged and anoxic or non-oxygen soil, and ability to tolerate brackish water. These are very important. This is a very important member of the species. It has the ability to remove salt from brackish water through the ultrafiltration in their roots. And this is therefore a natural tree that participates in reverse osmosis. Very special. Then we have the buttonwood tree that looks like a tree. It grows along our shoreline. And unfortunately, we use the buttonwood for coal, for furniture making. But of course, it's very important in protection of our flooded coastline. Mr. Deputy, I said those things about the mangroves just to ensure that we as policymakers understand what it is that we have. And like I said, I grew up in Waterkey, where that island is surrounded by 4 species that I mentioned. In order for us not to put the cart before the horse, we need to know or do the following. In order to have carbon credits at all, there's massive amount of ecosystem science that must take place on a constant rolling basis to understand and certify what the Bahamas has as its natural assets. Given the Bahamas has limited or no science funding mechanism, it is imperative that local and international scientists receive grant funding to support the public's effort to accomplish these goals. Mr. Deputy, we as a government must not be or appear to be hostile to scientific research. We must welcome in all science and their grant funding to accomplish our national carbon goals. Further, new carbon credits require new mangroves, and someone speak to restoration. Seagrass, also important, but in recent times we noticed that seagrass is now becoming a part of our diet. They're making them in smoothies, making them in salads, so we also now must find a way to protect our seagrass. And coral protection, and I'm very happy to know that Coral Vita in Grand Bahama, they're doing extensive research on corals, and they were also successful at winning a global award for the works that they're doing. We must be careful how we issue permits to developers. Very important. Removing our wetlands, dredging into our seabeds. And you know, nature has a way of reclaiming its own. Where there's erosion, there will be subsequent deposition. We all know, and we hear this in science, wherever there's a cause, there's an effect. In science, the cause explains why something happened. The effect is a description of what happened. All of the above are directly related to climate change. Before we can even have the audacity to claim carbon credits, we must first address those major aspects that continue to pollute our atmosphere. And let us deal with the cruise ship. According to research, I don't know, ask me where I got it from, but according to research, one cruise ship, and I thought I'll do further research on this. It's incredible. It's saying that one cruise ship spews more carbon into the atmosphere than 1 million cars. One cruise ship emits more carbon into the atmosphere. We're talking about welcoming our cruise ships into the harbor, and it's all well and good. I'll do further research on that. I promise I will do further research on that. While we welcome them into our harbor, they should be obliged, and then this is important. While we welcome them into our harbors, they should be obliged to use shore-to-ship power and desist from burning low-grade fuel over our islands. This is a revenue stream that we can tap into. Allow BPL to construct some standalone dedicated service stations to service these cruise ships. It's a revenue stream. We all know in here, or when you're driving by the harbor, when they turn the engines on, the black smoke goes up into the air, it's all through the city. Make it policy that they hook up to our local power source. Pay us some money for it. Because we know that the air passengers, the airline passengers, or the air arrivals, they spend more money. Anyhow, it's the overnight. But the cruise ship passengers, they in and out, they're in the harbor, burning up these low-grade fuel, polluting our air, make them pay for it. So again, BPL can now benefit directly from that. Now, let us be aware that no matter their direct economic benefit, you must not allow the ships to continue to pollute not only the air, but our waters, be they cruise ships, tankers, freight carriers, or any other type. As we benefit from our airspace, we also need to benefit from our blessed ocean. They will pay for it. Why? Because the Bahamas sits in a very critical shipping lane. They have to go through. Find a way to make them pay for it. Question is, who monitors the billions of tons of garbage they dump into our ocean? The ocean that Anderson said earlier that absorbs carbon. Who monitors the low-grade fuel that they burn in our territory? Who monitors those? That's the question I'm gonna leave on the floor. And maybe all of us should now, when we're on our phone, do research. And if it's not being monitored, we should monitor. Hold them responsible. You know, as we experienced during the devastation of Hurricane Dorian, we as a small nation, we are on the front line of a major war that we didn't start. We're on the front line. I remember standing on Casuarina Bridge before the all-clear was given, along with the now leader of the opposition, pulling people out of the water, survivors, because of the devastation of Hurricane Dorian. And West Grand Bahama, you know all of us from Grand Bahama, including our Minister of Housing. We often brag about the Grand Lucayan waterway. Oh, y'all didn't know she's the one in Grand Bahama. Yeah, she's Grand Bahamian also. The largest waterway system in the country. A lot of dredging took place. And while we may thought it was the convenience of shipping, those investors had other alternative other motives. They were collecting film. They were collecting quarry to sell. How do we benefit from that? Well, that would be 1965. I mean, Anderson talked about 65 this year I was born, so I don't know exactly what happened. But systems should have been put in place where we do a thorough investigation. Why are you doing so much dredging? How are we going to benefit as a nation? In fact, we are suffering. And like I said earlier, nature has a way of reclaiming its own. Hurricanes hit Grand Bahama harder than any other island on a consistent basis, along with the United States. There's one nation in this world that receives a hurricane or get hit with a hurricane every year. It's the United States, particularly along the Louisiana coastline. And then in the Caribbean, we are the one that get hit the most. But a part of it is a part of our own doing. We interfere with nature. We take up our mangroves. We dredge into our seabed, not being aware that Mother Nature is going to come up with a vengeance. So, Mr. Deputy, while we are seeking to pass this very important bill, it is very important for us to understand all aspects of the bill. Let us do an inventory of what we have, an inventory of what we have to protect, what is really helping us. And so the carbon credit, we are seeking carbon credits, but we are getting carbon credits from the mangroves. So we cannot destroy those. We have to find ways to restore, to replenish, to regenerate, so that we be responsible, so we can have more sustainable carbon credit down the road. So having said those very few words, I'm happy that you're listening to my song, Let There Be Peace on Earth. There was no point of order. There was no back and forth. And as such, Mr. Deputy and colleagues, Central Grand Bahama rests. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to start off where the member for Central Grand Bahama left off, because it has always been a major concern of mine since I learned a long time ago the environmental damage that was done to Grand Bahama and its development. And one of the reasons why Grand Bahama has a problem with the water table today is because of that Grand Lucayan waterway, which in fact sliced the island in half and destroyed the water table. So, and unfortunately, you say nature reclaims its own. Unfortunately, that's not going to be reclaimed. And The problem, of course, is you said they were actually collecting fill, but they were also creating land to sell at prices to make exorbitant profits. And, you know, we are, I can't say in quite a life and death struggle with the Grand Bahama Port Authority, but certainly about what is the role of the Grand Bahama Port Authority going forward after, I think they've got 35 or so years left, 34 years or so left, something like that. 2054. So how many years is that? Can you do the math? Yeah.
27.
How many? Is that two? 30 something, right? 32 years left. And there's this onward discussion about Grand Bahama's development. And, you know, I've said, you know, it's a place it's a real toss-up for me between Exuma and Grand Bahama. I mean, you know.
Toss-up?
A toss-up, yeah. I mean, they're both extraordinarily beautiful places. And what strikes you particularly when you take young Bahamians, it amazes me. It's the second largest city in the country, and so many, Freeport is, and so many young Bahamians have never been there. And it struck me when I would support the Doris Johnson teams to go there for the basketball games, how fascinated the kids were when they actually saw this city for the first time. They just could not believe that a place like this actually exists in the Bahamas. And the first thing they say is it looks like Miami. So they think that they're in the United States when they go there. It was built for 250,000 people. The island itself now has less than 60,000 people. So in many respects, the future of our country, and I've said it many times, its development, its expansion, its growth has got to be in that city where all of this investment has taken place. And the environment is front and center. There are 4 islands in this country that are considered the Pine Islands. They are Abaco, Grand Bahama, Andros, and New Providence. We're busy destroying New Providence. The well fields used to at one point be sacrosanct. I remember going out as a child because my parents always preferred the local Christmas tree made from the pine. You had to go down to Lands and Surveys, pay 25 cents to get permission to cut, and you'd go down there. There used to be an inspector on the Coral Harbor Road, and he would ask to see your permit before you could walk into the field and cut a tree. I don't know if, I'm sure it still exists in law. Whether in fact that actually happens, I don't know. But what I do know is that step by step, the pine trees are disappearing in New Providence. And the pine trees are in fact connected to the water table because all of the islands in New Providence, in the Bahamas, where the pine trees are, you will find a substantial water table. So when you wreck the pine, you affect the water table. You also affect the rainfall. So we've known all of this for some time, and you know, I grew up in Collins Avenue, and my parents, my father, we were on 2 parcels of land. We used to call one the lot, and the other was the place where the house was. He came out of Baintown, and so grew up in a system where you raised chickens, geese, pigeon peas, all of this. But what he did was he did not take the silver palm thatch out of the yard, so he kept them all there. And so, of course, today it's all gone, but New Providence was covered in silver top, which if you go down to Acklands, you can see it, and Crooked Island, it's covered in silver top. But all of that is largely gone from New Providence. So and what we would often remark, as our parents would always remark to us, is why it is that people would buy land and immediately go and take a tractor, mow down all of the trees, and then go to the nursery and buy plants to put back. When in fact, the Bahamas was an exporter of hardwoods long before we came along. In the centuries when the British first came here, they said one of the first gifts that we gave, that the Harvard College got, was from the Bahamas, where they cut hardwoods out of Eleuthera and sent them as an endowment to to Harvard College, and the hardwoods included mahogany, which we call Madeira. And one of the things you will notice again about Freeport is when you go to Freeport, there are all these Madeira trees planted throughout the city. So there is mahogany trees everywhere. And in fact, it's part of the beauty of the place. The pine and the mahogany trees, and then you've got horseflesh, and you've got wild tamarind, and these are all the hardwoods that we had in our country, which we exported. So there are many of us who've known this is an issue. I joined when I came back from university, from law school. I joined the Bahamas National Trust, and I served for 2 years as the chair of the environmental committee of the trust. And so I got, in my rounds with the National Trust, got to see many of the beautiful spots in our country and to help advocate for the preservation of the lands. And this is why the discussions that are going on now about the project in North Andros are so sensitive to me. The former Minister of the Environment, Ken Dorset, was explaining to me that it may be, well, he told me, this is the first I'd heard this, that it may be more valuable for the Bahamas to simply keep the aragonite in the water as opposed to mining the aragonite. It was patterned after what I believe has happened in Guyana, where the Guyanese are paid by the Norwegian government to simply keep the forests the way they are. And so this is the first I'd heard of these possible trade-offs. And this is now morphed into what the COP process it now calls carbon credits. So as many people have explained here this morning, I say humankind, but it's largely been the North or the developed countries, have been pouring carbons into the air, largely mining oil, burning those fuels and coal, and this has been poured into the atmosphere. Development came as a result of using these resources. So during the Industrial Revolution, which I believe is the 18th, 19th, and the end of the 17th century, when things started to change, the developed countries were able to get a jump on the rest of us, and they were able to use the air for free, no cost. So what you do is you mine the coal, you developed your factories, you produce all these manufactured goods, and then you extracted the resources from countries like the Caribbean and Africa, and you created great wealth for these developed countries. But the externalities were not monetized. So there was essentially no cost for using the ocean, no cost for using the air. So the great debate when we went to the first COP conference, which came up with many of these, the agreement when Obama was president in Paris, the great debate, and largely led by India, was this. You're telling me that I must cut back on using fossil fuels, which will hamper my development, but you are not willing to compensate me for doing that after having used the air for free. So you got away with it for 200 years, dumping fossil emissions into the air, developed your economy, and now when I'm trying to catch up by doing the same thing, you're saying, no, you can't do that. But you don't want to come up with a funding mechanism to help me get to where you are. And that's that's the crux of the argument which is going on now. It is in some senses a moral argument, but at the end of the day, these all come down to economic arguments. And some governments are just flat out refusing. They say, nope, if you don't come to a deal on this, we are simply going to go and proceed with how we believe it's in our best interest to do so. And so the whole issue of carbon credits comes up as a mechanism to try and persuade countries to move in the direction to help the developed world get to where they want to get, using the economic mechanisms to do so. But as I said, there's also a moral element in it, is that this is all one, human beings are all one, we're all one family, it's all one world, there's no second Earth to go to, and we need to figure out a way to try and resolve this. We have, as a country, you've heard our Prime Minister, and I would say Prime Ministers in the plural, have made the public case that the developed countries have to take more vigorous efforts to resolve this problem. It's like apple pie, they say in the US. Nobody can be against apple pie because it simply tastes good. So nobody can, you just get up and say, oh, I'm climate change is here, climate change is real. You hear it all the time. But I was struck by a recent conversation that I had, the CARICOM foreign ministers had with the Canadian foreign minister. And one of our members asked the question of the minister, will you, when you go to your G7 meetings, will you make the case for the vulnerability index? In other words, the argument which is going on that you need to have a special regime for small island developing states, since we are being dumped upon it, if you want to use that expression, as a result of climate change. We bear the brunt of climate change. The hurricanes are coming. The hurricanes are more intense. The destruction, for example, that took place in Grand Bahama and Abaco. And more frequently, more intensely. So the question should be, as a moral element, it should be an open and shut case. You're causing damage. Your scientists are saying that you're causing the damage. So what is there to discuss? You need to come up with a regime to assist on a concessionary basis, funding for mitigation and adaptation. And you would have thought that's an open and shut case. So they put the question to the Canadian foreign minister. Will you make the case? And I thought that this would be yes, without a doubt. But what I heard was hesitation, we'll do our best. So I said to the Prime Minister when I reported the meeting that our friends are still not convinced of this case. Because if they were really convinced, there should be no question at all about whether or not the Bahamas should access, or the CARICOM countries should access, concessionary funding. It should be like night follows day. But a lot of talk, but not happening. In the meantime, you go to Long Island, you go to Andros, you go up to Grand Bahama and Abaco, and you see the amount of work that has to be done in terms of mitigation and adapting to the changes that are coming. And we simply do not have the resources which are available to us to carry this out. So every year, there's this, the prognosis is it's getting worse, not getting better. In fact, since the Paris COP conference took place, despite all the pledges of 1.5 degrees, in fact, the Earth has continued to warm, and really there's been no substantial cutback in the emissions being dumped into the air. It's just not happened. And people keep trying to make the moral case, but it's just not moving the needle on this. So hopefully this legislation and the regimes around the world will do something to move the needle toward actually bringing change. We are in discussions with our international partners in this region about national security. And the question on national security is, one of the questions on national security is, what about climate refugees? What about climate refugees? And how is that a problem for us? Well, the Bahamas, I'm advised, is 80% of the land in the Bahamas is less than 3 feet above sea level. So that means if we have sea level rise, that means 80% of the country disappears. That's what it literally means. And so when you hear the Prime Minister and other public officials say that climate change is existential for the Bahamas, that's what it means. It means that you can be up to your neck in water. That's what it literally means. And I saw the mayor of Miami Beach saying that he's going to defeat it because they have the resources. He was talking about how they were able to get aggregate and raise the road 3 feet because, you know, they've had substantial flooding in Miami Beach. But the question is, if none of this can be done, and they're saying this could be as early as 2050, and certainly by 2100, we're going to be in serious problems if there's not anything done to mitigate or adapt to these changes. So the problem is for most of us in here, certainly for the member for Fort Charlotte and myself, in 50 years we can be around no house. So you could say, you could add the former Prime Minister to it. So you might say it's not our problem, but it is our problem because we have children, grandchildren who are coming along, and you'd want them to have a Commonwealth of the Bahamas to live in. I mean, we're all arguing about resources now and, what we ought to do to make the place safe, but no one wants to have, but I can't count the number of times I speak to parents who say, even today, I talk about the family that I met in Long Island, and he's got this business down there. And he tells me the story of his 3 children. He says, my daughter was a 4.0 student in high school. She went off to university in Canada. She's not coming back. My second daughter, same issue, goes off to Canada. She's not coming back. Says, my son is 16 years old. He's now a 3.9 student. I know he's about to go to university. I don't know whether he's coming back. So I asked myself, what am I building this business for? Who am I going to hand it off to? So you have parents who are really concerned about that, and it's sad that their children have to get up and go somewhere else to live, a place that they've spent so much time investing in. So the question then is, where do you go? Some countries, island countries in the South Pacific, have already negotiated with New Zealand and Australia that if their countries disappear, and some of them have already gone underwater, that they have the ability to emigrate to New Zealand or Australia. So the obvious answer for us, since we are 50 miles away from our dear friends, is that 90 miles to the south, yeah, we could go that way. We could sign a concordat with them and move south if you wish. But the way things are going, they're likely to be underwater too. So the question is, where do you go? And you have to start pointing out to these developed countries that not only will be there this pressure from lawful migration, but people will pretty soon start taking to the seas if there is not a solution to this problem. And I've risked my job by publicly bringing this issue of migration to the United States to the attention of the public because, as I've said many times from public platforms, every week there's a Bahamian who calls me up and says, I've been refused a visa to go to the United States. And when they explain to you the reasons why, or the lack of reasons why, it does not add up or make any sense. And I've spoken to American diplomats and their political leaders at the highest levels, and I've said to them, look, if the 400,000 of us of the Bahamas decide to move to the United States one day, it would not make a single difference or impact in the U.S. None. They wouldn't even, you wouldn't even notice it. It'd be a blip, just a blip on the screen, if that. And so the hoops through which many Bahamians are caused to go through to get lawful permission to go to the United States, and using something called 2141B. So they always give you a reason. And the reason is you do not have sufficient ties to your home country. And when you examine what the history of the people, there's certainly no suggestion that they have any idea of migrating to the United States. But still, it is a problem. So I say to them, we, for example, are lined up in a public sense with the United States in this matter with Ukraine. And while we are dealing with all these matters of high state and all the rest of it, I would like to be able to get, you know, the mechanic who wants to go to the States to go shopping at Walmart, I want to get him a visa. And we can't seem to move the needle in that direction, you know. And unfortunately, there's nothing the Foreign Ministry of the Bahamas can do. You get calls on this all the time, and there's simply nothing that can be done. You just have to keep applying. Eventually, in their system, they relent. And I've said that according to their law, United States law, the decision on visa matters, they are entirely subjective. They're not objective decisions. So it is literally what that officer feels at the time you appear before him. And no one can intervene in that decision. There's no appeal. All you can do is try again. So one of the discussions that I've had in a more general sense, that's a specific example, with both the EU, I'll call them the developed world, is what I call asymmetries. The relationship between us is asymmetrical in the sense that they ask us to do many things. One of the irritant with the EU is the unfunded mandates they impose on this country with the financial services sector, which has really shrunk it to the point of almost wrecking it. And then you ask them, well, okay, this is the net effect on us. What is the compensating return for the Bahamas? And you always get a blank wall. So I say it's asymmetrical because it seems to me the argument is that it's always one-sided. So they get, we don't get. And the question is, how do we improve this in the international system with the trade-off? So our diplomats are going to have to be more skillful as time goes on in dealing with these matters. And when you hear the passion, for example, with which the Member of Parliament for Angleton spoke about our country and the country that we're seeking to build and hand off to the next generation, part of what we have to do, I believe, to make our way in the world is to give our people precisely what she's saying, a greater sense of themselves, because it's the intangible that's gonna give us the ability to fight. You know, John Paul, who was the Roman Catholic Pope 2 popes ago, made the case, used to always say, that people have a right to exist. It doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or, you know, you're black or white, or it doesn't, none of that counts. As Martin Luther King says, the only thing that counts is the content of your character. So we have a right to exist. The Bahamas has a right to exist. Our country has a right to exist. And we must imbue in our kids that fact that they have a right to exist. And because they have that right, they should fight with all their might to protect this country, which is the little corner which has been assigned to us by the Almighty to take care of. And that's what we're doing in part, in a small way today with this legislation. We're trying to say, what can we do to move the needle along to protect this corner of the green earth or the blue earth, however you want to describe it, that we have the temporary superintendence of. And if we do a good job with that, we believe that the children who are coming up behind us will embrace that vision. And if we happened, some people say you always come back in some other form, nothing ever is destroyed. So if we come back one day, 50, 100 years from now, we'll see that we have a successful Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Otherwise, you just throw your hands up in despair. And so, as I was saying about North Andros, there is a great debate about this. And I know that when I was down there, I immediately, and I said some of the things I did, I tried to stay out of the actual arguments on the point, to just make the general point about the protection of our resources. But of course, it all then, people start directing things at me personally, saying, you're trying to stop progress, you're trying to stop this and all the rest of it. But, we have a responsibility to not cause the next generation one day to say, if we're still along sitting in the rocking chair, why did y'all give away the land? Why did y'all do this? And now leave us with this problem. The people in Grand Bahama just talked about the Lucayan waterway, have a great big hole left in the ground from digging aggregate in Grand Bahama. It's full of water. Ain't nothing beautiful about it. Nothing beautiful about it. Blasting took place. The foundations of people's homes were destroyed, cracked. All of that happened, right? That's the price you pay. And they were, I suppose, because it was the township which built the great city of Freeport, maybe those residences or residents were considered expendable, so it didn't matter. And the environment didn't matter. But that's the evidence we have. You go, you dig up the land, you take all the aggregate, and all that's left is a big hole in the ground with water. And the question is whether, no matter how you want to dress it up, whether that's a future which we want to impose on another island in this country. That's the issue. And whether we have a responsibility to protect the land, the trees, for future generations. This monetizes all of that. And this says we can get, for keeping it as it is, we can get some funding for the general good. And that's why it's important for us to pass this, to see if we can take advantage of it. People have already hopped on this and said they can give us this million, the next million. But we want to be sure that it's properly regulated, that the money ends up where it's supposed to be, and that it goes to benefit the general good and not monetized into specific pockets to be for the general good. That's essentially what this is about. And I'm happy to support it. I hope it works, and I hope that the next generation appreciates the decisions that we made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. I know that we're near 1 o'clock, and therefore I return at 3 o'clock to commence. But I want to, before we close, Mr. Deputy, I just want to send out condolence to the Speaker, the passing of our brother, and I also want to send out condolence to Paul Willie on the passing of his brother. But most importantly, Mr. Deputy, on social media, there's a photo going around, a beautiful photo of me, with quotes. A recent photo that I have visited a certain facility, and I made a statement saying how the government is doing so well. And I want to quote, because it's pure fabrication. So I want the Bahamas to know that it's fabrication. And it states, I quote, but it's not from me. The photo, unfortunately, is mine. I had to come down here and congratulate them myself personally. I've never seen a government do so much in so short time. You all are very good. But I want the record to reflect that is pure fabrication. And therefore, I will now take my seat and commence my debate at 3 o'clock.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, this is the appropriate time for us to take the lunch break. We'll return after the suspension at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Is there a second? Second. Ooh, everybody ready to go? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House be suspended until 3 p.m. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is agreed. The business of the House stands suspended until 3 p.m.
All right.
I told my people, you know, give me mine.
Oh, shit.